So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from, and welcome to this Similarweb webinar, Travel Beyond Booking, How New Players and Hotel Brands are reshaping the travel landscape. We're really excited to be joined here today by our special guest, Tim Davis, and we have some pretty exciting concepts that we want to run through, talk about how the travel industry is changing, and what the impacts could be on the wider industry, on your business, and beyond. So moving forward, just to give a basic sense of what we're going to do, we're going to give you a very quick introduction to Similarweb. Then we're going to move on to who are these new players in travel and what their impact could potentially be. We're going to talk about hotel brands specifically, and then we're going to close with a Q&A where we'll take your questions from during the webinar. We'll answer them all there at the end. So if you have any questions, please utilize the toolbar below and where it says Q&A, input your questions, it will get to us and we'll make sure to get to as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. So we skipped over one slide. So who are we today? I am Ethan Chernovsky. I'm the Director of Corporate Marketing here at Similarweb. I am joined by my colleague, Giti Greenberg, our Director of Digital Insights. And with our special guest, Tim Davis, the Managing Director of Pace Dimensions. Not only is Pace Dimensions one of the leading consultancies helping travel brands navigate this move in the digital world and beyond, but he is also an incredibly experienced executive, having spent over a decade at Hilton and other leading travel brands. Tim, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, no problem. Glad to be a part of it.
So moving back, who is Similarweb? Similarweb is the leading market intelligence company. We allow our customers to understand everything that is happening in the digital world. We break that down into many categories in terms of understanding what's happening online with web intelligence, what's happening on mobile in terms of both web and apps, what's happening across your industry, what's happening in the search space, and what's happening with digital advertising. And with that information and intelligence, our clients and customers then go on to make fundamentally better decisions, empowering them to understand their markets, understand where the opportunities are, and then how to function accordingly. How do we do this? So we have a very comprehensive system that enables us to firstly build out the world's largest panel to understand what's going on actually every day within hundreds of millions of devices. We then have supplemental data from partners, internet service providers, and the like. We leverage public data sources, and then we bring all of that information through one of the leading R&D teams in the world with 150 of the most talented minds in the space to screen that data, understand it, add on many layers of machine learning and prediction algorithms and the like to deliver our insights through our flagship platform, through API and integrations, and through our services and consulting that we offer to our customers. Who are some of the people we do it specifically in the travel space? We have many customers around the world who are using it every day across a variety of industries for a myriad of different use cases. And that quick introduction takes us to the meat of what we want to get into in terms of what's happening in the travel landscape, how is it changing, and what do you need to know? So let's start with the new players in travel. So the first one, and one of the largest, is Google. Google's move into travel has been well covered in the press. It is a major area of focus and in some cases concern. And so it's really important to understand what this means in general. And let's start with Pete. What does Google's move in specifically, and more importantly, how has it impacted the flight space as an example?
Yeah, so Google, as Ethan said, so first of all, Google is a digital giant, and there were talks for many years about Google move into the travel world, and Google acquired a few startup companies in the field of travel. But what we're seeing in the last year, we're seeing that Google makes further and further steps within the travel industry. So during the past 12 months, the traffic to Google Flights has increased by 57%. And that means that 15 million visits to Google Flights turned out to outgoing links, making Google Flights a leader in the flights referrals industry. And let's go over, and this is specifically for for airlines, right? So we're not talking about Google recently added hotels and added other services, but this is just for airlines. So if we look at it, we can see that it sends significant referral traffic to United.com and to Fly Frontier and to Alaska Airlines, but a lot of the big airlines are still missing here, have not yet made partnership with Google Flights. Companies like Delta and other big airlines in the US are still not included in this. And so it's really interesting, the model that Google is currently taking, because Google VP of Travel and Shopping has said that Google does not plan to turn into OTA. But what we are seeing is Google trying to reclaim its position as a meta search engine for travel and send traffic to the direct traffic to the different airlines. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that it's actually been able to compete with Kayak in some airlines. So for example, for United, this URL, which is the Google Travel Ad Services, it's a redirect URL, has sent more traffic, it's responsible for more traffic, more referral traffic than kayak.com. For Fly Frontier as well. With Alaska Air, they just started their partnership, so we're still seeing it grow. I can foresee that it's going to overcome Kayak as well in the coming next month.
And I think, Tim, this is the great place to hear from the brand perspective. When you see a giant like Google enter into the mix, what is maybe what is a brand thinking, and what is the mentality needed in order to maximize a change like that for a positive for a brand?
Well, I think firstly, the thing to understand is Google's role. Google is a media company that is selling advertising, and that's the primary mechanism by which they make their money. And although entering the market is all a relative term depending on how many years you think about, but Google's turning over about $14 billion in advertising in travel alone through their search and their meta search products. So they're a huge player when it comes to digital media. And together with Facebook, they command about 77% of all the digital advertising space done. So they're a really big player in this area. Their approach in travel has been more subtle than some, subtle in terms of they have not been racing to make bookings and act like a retailer. And there's a very good reason for that. And that's because half their income comes from two companies, Booking Holdings and Expedia, who deliver half their revenues. So they're not going to go into the retail space because that would dramatically impact their income. From a brand point of view, so the supplier brands look at them today relatively constructively as a company that enables them to drive bookings direct to the suppliers. And although their success in doing so is very mixed, primarily because if you take the hotel space, for example, hotel supply is very fragmented around the world, meaning there's lots of small and medium-sized companies, thousands and thousands of them around the world. But in North America, that's not true. 75% of all the hotel supply in North America is part of a branded chain, and most of those brands are part of a large group, Marriott being the largest. So from that point of view, you see a lot more traffic going direct to brands in North America than you do outside of North America. So in summary, I would say that the suppliers look at Google relatively positively as a channel through which they can drive more direct traffic and counter-compete against the big online retailers who have grown very, very significantly in the last few years, and in particular outside of North America, where the brand penetration is not as strong as it is in North America.
think those are really important insights, and the perspective of understanding how these newer players are going to impact the space and what the decisions they make could influence in terms of the decision making on the other end is a really important element to analyze. And it leads really nicely into our next, the case study we're going to look at. And in my mind, this is among the most interesting. And it's looking at a company that is not known for being a giant in travel, but a giant in kind of wholesaling goods to the consumer. And it's Costco. And Costco is moving to travel. And Pete, I think one of the very surprising things is that not only did Costco move into travel, which we saw years ago, but that they're succeeding in growing over time.
Right. So we're used to think about travel with, like Tim said, in the concept of the Booking group and the Expedia group, and we think about TripAdvisor and Airbnb, but we don't think of untraditional players. And with Costco, it's really interesting because we started looking at the travel category and the sites who have shown significant growth over the past months and years. And we suddenly saw that Costco Travel is actually there, and it has about 4 million visits per month. This is not a lot, but it's not so small as you would imagine. So, and it's also being able to grow 12% in the past, in the past 24 months. It's been growing 12%. It's not amazing growth, but it's a sustainable growth. And it becomes even more interesting where you see where this growth comes from, because this growth doesn't come from your traditional marketing mix, your traditional SEO, PPC, referral programs. This is a very, very unique model that what they're actually doing, Costco Travel is actually doing, is getting most of its traffic from one source, and that's Costco.com. So what they're doing, Costco Travel, is they're leveraging the faith and the loyalty and the brand awareness of Costco, and people are used to buying Costco all sorts of items and things and products, and travel becomes just another one of them.
And Tim, so what, as opposed to just seeing this as a brand new phenomenon, this could actually offer up an opportunity as maybe the digital face on a classic marketing channel of partnerships.
Sure. Yeah. No, actually, it's really interesting because when I first started in marketing for Hilton, and that's going back 20 years, one of the primary marketing routes to consumers was through the large department stores that had a good ability to segment and target consumers. So we used to partner with people like Bloomingdale's and other department stores and brands like Montblanc and Tumi, where we felt the audience that was interacting with those brands were relevant for our particular brand of hotels. Fast forward to the current day, what you see in the digital world has been a rapid growth of a few real huge global players dominating digital marketing. But players like this are interesting because they offer micro channels, the ability to reach particular segments of audience and diversify a brand's dependence on a few big digital marketing players. So this particular one, Costco, engages more, as you say, on a wholesale business. They use the same business model with their suppliers and negotiate net rates with fairly deep discounts to sell distressed inventory that suppliers want to be able to market. And that's why you can see in the chart on the right a big jump in the beginning of the year when people are looking to book their summer vacations, and then a gradual decline through the year as you go through. The bulk of their business is holiday business that they're selling, and they're selling it when hotel companies may be less full, their occupancy is less high. So I think Costco is really interesting because it fulfills a particular market niche, but I also think there's going to be a whole plethora of different digital marketing brands, retailing brands, all kinds of brands that have audiences that are going to be specifically useful for particular travel suppliers. And we'll see partnerships like this evolve, I'm sure, and propositions like this evolve to diversify both the marketing and the distribution channels for suppliers.
I think it's a critical analysis here, because what we're looking at is two primary takeaways from this first section. And the first is how rapidly the travel landscape is evolving. And I think, it's something we didn't even go into, but, we looked at over the last year, a massive switch in terms of TripAdvisor's business model and how that impacted the landscape. There's no time to not be tied into what's happening.
Yeah, so it's a really dynamic industry. So TripAdvisor decided to try and go into the OTA world, and then they reversed back from that, and the implication on traffic and traffic funnels was tremendous and significant. And we're also seeing OTAs and even hotel brands going into the model of short-term rentals, and we're seeing this industry constantly change, the offering constantly changing, and there's still great opportunities to grow and to leverage all those changes. You just need to be dynamic and really put your ear out in order to understand what's going on in the market with your competitors. And once you know that, you know what's the trend, you know how to react and adjust your digital strategy accordingly.
Yeah, let me add to that point, if I may. We did a study last year where it really showed the players, particularly the incumbent brands that exist today in these marketplaces, as the digital space becomes more mature, the need for speed and being able to execute well becomes incredibly important to win in this particular space. And whereas companies may have done strategy reviews every couple of years, 2 to 3 years, to make sure they were pointing and shooting in the right direction, when it comes to the digital space, if you don't have up-to-the-minute data and understanding, and you're not reviewing that position at least every quarter, you're likely to miss a trick. And the example you gave of TripAdvisor, their moves, some of the recent moves with Google as well, and some of the recent investments by Booking Holdings and Expedia into tourism and destination activities, those kinds of things, if you're not watching this stuff all the time, you're going to miss it.
Yeah, and I think that leads perfectly into that second takeaway, which is, if what we were saying before was how important it is to understand so that maybe you don't lose market share, if TripAdvisor, if their business model changes, what could that mean for your business? It's equally there in terms of the question of opportunities. And so if I am not thriving from a traffic perspective under the current landscape, as new brands enter into the mix, they offer a unique opportunity. And as Tim said, identifying that crossover with audience. So what Hilton did with the likes of Bloomingdale's, can your brand do with some other partner that's going to be entering the space? Because as they're new, they're still fresh, and newness generally equals opportunity. And so being ahead of the game on these types of changes can be the difference between major digital success and falling behind key competitors. With that, let's move to that second topic that we're going to discuss, which is kind of the rise of the hotel brands and what they mean to the wider ecosystem. And we saw this, quite a bit, which is hotels really trying to stand out on their own, away from maybe the channels that had been sending them traffic in the past, or dealing with their actual kind of buying of rooms, to own their own traffic. And it's had mixed results, but there are some strategies that are piquing interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all know that hotel brands are trying to get more and more conversion in a direct way and less through the OTAs. And so they need to do this leap of faith towards a better, more sophisticated, more mature digital strategy. And we took a look at the leading three hotel brand chains, the Marriott, Hilton, and IAG. And we're seeing currently that they have more or less the same digital strategy, which is mostly reliant on direct and organic search. And this is a very strong indicator of their brand, because most of their organic search, at least for Marriott and Hilton, is coming from branded search, so branded keywords. So we're seeing the strategy. IAG is a bit more focused on non-branded keywords. So we're seeing the strategy is still very, very much focused on brands. We're also seeing something interesting here with referrals. We're seeing IAG focusing more on referrals versus Hilton. And so we wanted to see the actual conversion rates. And the conversion rates, I have to say, are impressive. So we're seeing 10% conversion rate for Marriott and 9% for Hilton when it comes for direct traffic. Organic search is 8% and 10%, and referrals 7% for Marriott and Hilton with 11%. So you see that there's not a lot of difference between the different channels. It's not like there's huge gaps in traffic that is coming from referrals. For Hilton, for example, traffic coming from referrals is actually doing better than traffic coming from direct. So we wanted to take a look at the investment in referrals. So we chose TripAdvisor, which is the biggest referral source in the hotel chain category. And actually 1% of the entire category traffic is coming from TripAdvisor. We think it could be more. We think hotel chains, if they really want conversion made directly online, can even increase the push and make TripAdvisor a better source for traffic for them. Because if we look at the top sites that TripAdvisor is sending traffic to, we can almost not see hotel chains there, and if we can, they're very, very small. So we can see Best Western and we can see Marriott at the end, but the percentages are really, really small. So there's a lot of potential here, and I would say that there's also a lot of potential in non-branded keywords and PPC. I think that is a part of having a more mature, more sophisticated digital strategy. And brand is very, very important. We keep saying that at the end of it, brand is everything. But in such a competitive market where brands need to fight with, the giants to get the traffic, there needs to be more sophisticated and aggressive strategies.
So I think Tim, that leads into a point you were making earlier, which is, the elephants in the room in the Expedia group and the Booking group. What is competition for this type of traffic mean in an environment where those two giants are operating?
Well, I think one of the implications that you said earlier is very important. Is brand, scale of brand, and when you look at the dynamics of Booking Holdings and Expedia, who own two of those brands on that chart, so they own Expedia and Hotels.com. So when you combine those together, those two companies are getting a very significant share of the traffic that is booking online today. That said, when you say, well, why is that? Is it to do with the marketing strategies, or is there other dynamics playing in? And it's really as simple as this, that when you look at the nature of their businesses, so Expedia and Booking as retailers, it's a bit like comparing the large supermarkets and farmers. Farmers are a highly fragmented industry, supplying goods and services to supermarkets, but the supermarkets are dominated by, in each country, a few big chains, and they also have the market power and economic power to drive a lot of the value in the industry through them. So what's happening is two things. Number one, the hotel brands are consolidating quickly. I said before that 3/4 of all bedrooms in North America are part of a branded chain, and those branded chains are getting acquired more and more by the largest hotel groups. Outside of North America, consolidation is also happening, and probably at a faster rate, albeit from a further point back. I mean, even this morning, Accor Hotels just announced the acquisition of Movenpick. There is a lot of mid-scale hotel chains there that are not big enough, don't have the scale or market penetration to compete successfully on their own, and they're likely to get bought up by the larger hotel groups over time. Marriott's on that chart because they're simply the largest. They have more hotels than any other hotel group in the world, and therefore that helps them on a market power point of view. But I think the other suppliers, what they're going to end up doing is either increasing their penetration of supply in a particular destination to compete that way, and there are a number of brands around the world that do very well because they have a large share of the supply in one particular market, or they're going to develop more distinctive brands. So if you look at a company like Hilton, for example, they're doing less acquisition, more development of their own brands, growing them organically because they are more distinctive and helping them drive better results. So brands like Hilton and Hampton Inn, for example, are good examples. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of the companies that are not dominating in scale, selecting strategies like penetration or using their loyalty programs, or simply developing more distinct brands and focusing on niche propositions in order to compete more successfully. And I think the great news about the digital environment is there are more and more ways of reaching consumers, particularly with artificial intelligence coming in, that will help people track and target niche consumer groups to match with particular supplier brands. And I think we'll see a proliferation of that taking place, as well as some of the big players trying to dominate through scale.
It's a very interesting analysis, and I think that as people move towards these niches alongside these moves to acquire, are you not, I don't know if concerned is the right word, but do you not think that just leads to a greater setting where the large groups acquire their way to even greater heights? The more niche strength in a specific market and a specific brand awareness is much more attractive from an acquisition perspective. I guess the question is there a way, a roadmap that you can envision for a new player in the market to grow on their own and really dominate? Is there kind of one lesson they need to have in mind?
So I think it's not those who say this is sort of game over for hotel companies, it's not the case, because even the big players like Booking and Expedia, they're going to get disrupted too, because there are going to be even larger companies coming in to directly compete with them. You're seeing that with players like Amazon and Alibaba, who are all looking to enter the travel space and are developing their offerings. And they benefit from being multi-sector retailers with enormous consumer reach. And so they have both the consumer reach and also the investment in technology in order to understand what consumers want and be able to deliver them more relevant things. Now, that's a basis on which they'll compete. If you look at Airbnb, for example, who are in private accommodation, but now moving into independent hotels and unique hotels, they will gradually compete in that space too. And that's why Expedia and Booking Holdings have both been, in the last 12 months, investing very heavily in growing their private accommodation inventory in order to compete directly with Airbnb. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition from non-traditional travel brands that have massive market reach, huge investment in technology, and great understanding of consumer behavior. That's one angle. And then there's going to be substitute competition like the private accommodation players who come in and compete. And I think what will happen in the hotel brand space is There'll be a lot more consolidation, that's for sure, under more and more hotel brands and more business models. So, for example, representation as well as franchise and management. These are all different business models that are going to grow as the hotel brands themselves have now really divested themselves of the physical real estate, which is really owned mostly by other companies. Most of these brands don't own hotel real estate anymore. They're just brands. And so they're using their focus and their scale to get bigger at that.
It's a very interesting take, and I think it speaks to what we were talking about before, that need to really stay ahead of the game, because the disruption is coming and technology is going to be a core element towards staying ahead of the curve and identifying new opportunities. And I think we're seeing kind of here with the key takeaways, and we're going to jump into our Q&A, is that, you really need to be optimizing digital strategies for direct bookings. And I think that ownership of the relationship with the customer directly is going to be critical. And we're going to run through this because a lot of the points that we would touch upon here with the takeaways get hit in our Q&A. And we'll move to that with the first question that just came in from Jan. Jan asked, well, what about companies like Viator, which are dealing with experiences and the like? And so first of all, I think the key element, the lens to look at this through is, what is the purpose? And a lot of the real money and competition is coming over hotel rooms, because hotel rooms are that high-end good with lots of margin. Everyone's really excited. And so I think the first starting point would be, and maybe Tim, this is great to go to you, is how are hotel brands and how are kind of these big groups looking at these auxiliary services like experiences and the like as a part of their wider strategy?
Well, I would say in terms of action, lots of thinking and talking about them, but the really largest hotel groups like Marriott, Hilton, and Accor are starting to take actions in that area. And that's because they have, across all their hotel brands, a large penetration of individual destinations. So Accor in Paris, for example, have got several hundred hotels and a huge marketplace themselves to diversify and invest in individual businesses, whether it's experiences, whether it's restaurants, bars, laundry services, all these different lines of business. They are themselves a huge customer in a particular destination, and they're realizing they can split what is today a full service hotel, and with the scale they've got, start to provide those services not only to themselves but to other customer types. So we're starting to see some of that happen. But most of the action in tours and activities and experiences is being done by the big online retailers and TripAdvisor. So TripAdvisor, who has interest in Viator, for example, that move is a strategic move by TripAdvisor to really focus on an area where they can compete well. They have the most trusted review brand in that space. And so they've really doubled down on increasing their investments in tours and activities and experiences to complement their particular business. But of course, in a big boys world, and it really is a big boys world, Expedia and Booking Group have not been sat idly by. And they also, in recent months, have just announced acquisitions in that space to bolster their inventory of exactly the same thing. So the race is being driven by the big digital players and their ability to invest. And there is no doubt that tours and activities and experiences in general is hotting up to be a really, really intensively competitive space. And there'll be lots of consolidation and lots of M&A activity in that area.
I think it's a great take, and it leads into the next question, and this will maybe pass to you, Keet, which is, if Viator is a great partner for a company like TripAdvisor or competitors for the Expedia Group and the Booking Group, what can a company do from kind of a philosophical perspective to identify an ideal partner?
So I think it boils down to audiences. Team mentioned it at the beginning. I think it's if you want to create a partnership, first of all, you need to make sure that there's match in terms of the audiences and the niche audience that you want to reach through that partnership. And then it needs to also make sense business-wise. There's a lot of different business models within the travel industry. So we need to make sure that your interests are in the same direction, and also that always be dynamic, always change. We saw, for example, that Booking.com has recently completely altered the referral strategy in the UK and then reversed back to their original referral strategy. They've changed like 7 of their top referrals and then gone back to them just as a test, just as being dynamic, taking into consideration the seasonality. You might want to partner with different partners in different periods of the year. So all of these aspects need to take into consideration.
I think, we just got another question that I think fits with the same kind of idea of how just the absolute tremendous breadth of the space and where kind of these partnerships could lead and be. And it's actually a kind of a nice mix of 2 questions that we had. One of them asked, do these same concepts hold true for Asia? And another asked, how does this impact kind of OTAs that offer bus tickets or companies that are offering bus tickets directly? I think the starting point is every country and every region has unique elements in how they operate. So there are certain areas where bus ticketing is going to be much more valuable. So if I'm a company looking to expand into a certain region and I see that it's not part of my arsenal, but I could add that's a really interesting partnership idea. But I think that it kind of fits in with how global are the trends that we're seeing? And maybe we'll start with you and then hear from Tim as well.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting with the Similarweb data is that we can actually see the different digital strategy. Those big players like Booking.com and Expedia and TripAdvisor are implementing all over the world. And we see some similarities in the core digital strategy, but we see a lot of alignment and a lot of dynamics in the way they try to fit into a market. So for example, when we look at Airbnb, all over the world, brand is the most prominent way they use to penetrate a market. And we usually see that they appeal more to a younger audience. But we can see that, for example, in Germany, they use much more referral traffic, much more than they use it in any other country. And for example, we see that TripAdvisor is doing, SEO in every country in the world. They're the kings of SEO, but we do see that when they try to penetrate the Japanese market, which is highly concentrated by local players, they were more focusing on non-branded SEO strategy rather than the branded that they do in other countries. So I think the core strategies are the same, but they do tend to always listen to the market, be dynamic, change according to what's happened and according to where you are, what's your traffic share within the market and who are you competing with.
So Tim, let's ask you the same question. How do you view the kind of the balancing between growing a brand at the same time thinking globally? How do you balance things that have worked versus kind of the challenges of entering a new market?
So I think for sure that there are less and less barriers to entering new markets because technology is helping a great deal normalize that. So the challenge, for example, of language, technology is hugely helped brands overcome being able to communicate in multiple languages around the world, as an example. That said, I think the point made earlier is also extremely valid. The real need for digital players, most of which you can characterize as market makers, people who aggregate supply and use that aggregated supply to target particular consumers is consumer reach and share of supply. So what you see in Asia versus the Western world is very similar things. You know, Ctrip is the Booking, Holding, and Expedia equivalent of Asia. And they have a similar strategy insofar as they are acquiring supply of inventory of hotels and travel and tourism, as much as Booking, Holding, and Expedia are doing. And also they have great market reach in their Asian markets, in particular China. So what you see even now is players like, for example, Booking Holdings also taking stakes in companies like Ctrip, and being able to work with them and help them with supply in Western markets to gain market access to where Ctrip has strength in the Asian markets. And you will see a lot of that. But the main differences you're going to see is, Booking Holdings Group tend to acquire more. Expedia have declared that they're going to grow more organically. It will be interesting to see the reality of whether that's really enables them enough success and whether they have to also acquire to get footholds in different markets. Because ultimately, the speed at which the game is being played out is pretty fast. And so organic is okay if you have the time to invest and grow over time, but there is a lot of growing maturity in each of these markets, and sometimes it's just easier to buy. So we'll see what happens, in that particular space. I think suppliers are going to end up either being bought, so smaller brands being bought by larger brands, or they're going to increase their focus on penetration of supply and use niche strategies to compete in what is still a very fragmented world. There may be some big dominant players, but really when you look outside of the US, the UK, Germany, maybe France, outside of those markets, it's all to play for because they're not very consolidated markets.
And it's a really important analysis of how these things are progressing. And I want to use this to take it to our last question. And if you have any further questions, I mean, we'll make sure that at the last slide, there'll be a great email to reach out to. For any other questions you have, any specific details you'd like to speak more to Tim, please let us know. We'll make sure to connect you directly so we can get, any of your questions answered on these topics. But, a great area for us to end is, what is this? And this is a question from Lauren, and it's, what does this mean for other travel brands? So, and she said specifically airlines. So is this something that we're seeing as trends that are specific to just hotels? Are we seeing this having wider impact? And, Tim, maybe take the lead on this of where, who else is this going to be impacting, and how do these trends impact the wider landscape?
Yeah. So very interestingly, this is one area where the airlines are actually a long way ahead of other parts of travel, in particular tours and activities and hotels. And the reason is because a little more than 10 years ago, when the first online retailers were emerging, airlines had 85% of all their business coming through travel agents and only 10 or 15% coming direct. Whereas with many destination service companies and hotel companies, the exact opposite was true, meaning they had 15% or less of their business coming from travel agents and most of it going direct to the brands. So at that particular junction, the airline industry had to really decide how they were going to solve that particular strategic problem. And because it was a burning platform, they did act very aggressively and very decisively. Now the opposite is true. And although there is a lot of retail business still distributing airlines, they're making no money at it. There is very, very little margin in selling an airline ticket. It's, almost nothing. And if you look at even in digital advertising, companies like Kayak, for example, They do a nice job, and they're a market leader, but increasingly the margin they're making out of airlines is really, really slim. What they're doing is using the traffic as good traffic to cross-sell to other things. Hence the reason why Booking Holdings Group is investing so much in hotel inventory and experiences inventory, because they've got a bunch of consumers that they already know have an intent to travel because they bought an airline ticket or booked an airline ticket. And Google has the same advantage because they can pick up all the information from people's emails, the reservations made in email, to help them predict which consumers are likely to book hotels or book travel. And that's where the margin is for distribution and for advertisers. So airlines, I think economically, have less of an issue because they've done a much better job at fighting back control of getting direct access to consumers. And the level of competition is much less because of the hub networks that exist. Where the margin is for digital marketing and for distribution is more in the destination services, hotels, tours, activities, etc. And so people will, flight is still valuable because then you know if you've got a consumer who has an intent to travel, but it's most of the value is created by cross-selling and other things.
It's so this kind of perspective is so important to understanding what is driving traffic and ideas behind the strategic decisions these large companies are making based on where the margins are. And I want to end with a quick answer to one question that just came in, before the buzzer, and it was, how do we see the growth of alternative accommodations like vacation rentals, the Airbnbs of the world, against hotels? And maybe take a quick stab at this before we close. And in general, we're seeing a lot of strength, and make sure to check our blog because we have a great analysis of what Airbnb has been doing specifically in France to grow their value there. But and you can see, how do we see the difference between these two?
Yeah, so Airbnb, we talked about attractions before. So Airbnb has also started investing in attractions, and I think what we're going to see eventually is merger. So we're seeing hotel brands such as Marriott doing pilots to have their sorts of rentals. We're seeing Booking.com, Expedia, all of these big OTAs also starting to suggest rentals. And on the other hand, we're seeing Airbnb talking about maybe starting to sell hotel rooms as well. So I think what we would actually see at the end is not a brand that sells just these or just these. I think consumer would have the ability to choose from the variety of products, of the tourism products that are available, whether it would be in a hotel room or a short-term rental.
And I think this is exactly what, one of the things that Tim was talking about earlier, in the sense that you see this massive disruption come in, and then the changes ripple around it. So Airbnb makes their plants their flag in the ground, and you see companies moving more into that space to try and adapt to wherever the trend is. And when we talk about final takeaways, and maybe Tim and Yatit will give you each one last one. For me personally, the big takeaway is how rapidly this landscape is changing. And whether it's home rentals as a legitimate travel channel, whether it is the divestment, if not divestment, the lack of focus on airlines as a channel, as a product to sell, as opposed to a channel to reach people buying hotel rooms or services. It is how rapidly it changes, how important it is to be on top of those changes in as close to real time as you can be. And Tim, if you had one takeaway, what would it be?
I think it would be speed of change, meaning that companies need to be much more dynamic and really investing in understanding the changes in industry structure, and in particular the change in competitive forces, because in many of these sectors competition, direct competition, is relatively benign. But where the real competition forces are coming is from substitute competition and from intermediaries, market makers, digital market makers, who are coming in and aggregating supply and aggregating demand and making money out of the margin on the two. And if you don't understand those moves, if you're not looking at who the players are and correlating changes in performance with what's driving that change in performance, you're not going to get the insight necessary to develop effective strategies. And if you rely on what a lot of people do unfortunately rely on, which is, watching the news and watching the announcements. Well, it's okay, but this is strategy by anecdote. And if you're not investing yourselves in really trying to understand the insight relative to your specific company, you're not going to be able to develop effective strategies to compete.
And Giti, let's ask you the same question to close. What's that one major takeaway?
I completely agree with everything Tim said. I think that's the main takeaway. I think in the travel world, there are two main forces still: the ones that are digitally native and the ones that are traditionally not digital and had to make the move into a more digital business structure. And I think the gap is still visible, but it has to, if you want to survive in this competitive industry, you have to close this gap, and you have to be as sophisticated in your digital strategy as those digital native organizations.
It's a wonderful point to close on. And so thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Giti, for joining us. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to the email on the screen, sales@similarweb.com. We'll be happy to set up a demo. We can walk through all of this data in much more detail, what it could mean for your business or your venture. Check out our site to play around and see we have a free offering available at Similarweb.com for you to play around and see what kind of these trends mean for you. And thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you will join us again soon on a coming webinar. Thank you so much.